Hello, everybody. Welcome to the People of Nature podcast. This is our latest episode, and today we have with us Anisha Jayadevan. So, I met Anisha very coincidentally because she was here in Pune working for her PhD, which we will talk about. Anisha is a PhD candidate at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in US. She is currently studying the drivers and outcomes of tree plantation projects in the semi-arid open natural ecosystems of Maharashtra. She has previously worked on understanding how large mammals navigate fragmented landscapes in India. Together with Collective Cafe Oikos, she has also co-authored The Living Museum, an illustrated book on urban biodiversity. When not working, Anisha loves writing, birding, and taking naps. So we have somebody who has very diverse experience in ecology and wildlife with us, and especially her expertise on forest and plantations is very much interesting. So let me welcome Anisha to our podcast. Hello, Anisha.
Hi, Ajit. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for joining us, Anisha. So we'll start straight away with the questions. The interesting thing about your profile is you switched your field after doing a bachelor's degree from IT field to wildlife biology. What prompted this transition, and did the transition produce any challenges for you?
This was in 2012 that I was done with my engineering and I started working in a couple of software companies at the time and didn't really know that a field like ecology or conservation existed because at the time the field was very small and I didn't know of anyone working in the field. But gradually over time, I think I read an article about a National Geographic explorer from India, and then also went to an open day in the Indian Institute of Science and happened to meet some people in the ecology department thanks to a friend who took me there. And I was really fascinated that there were people studying everything from trees to elephants to insects. And I got talking with some of them who were doing a PhD at the department, and they told me about the different master's programs that exist in India in ecology and conservation, and also told me about this one program in NCBS, which is the Masters in Wildlife Biology and Conservation, that accepts people from different fields. I think WII also does this, and probably now there are many more master's programs that accepts people from different fields, but at the time there were just one or two. And then they also told me about the Yeti platform, which announces opportunities for different jobs in ecology and conservation. And so when an interesting opportunity came up on volunteering for a flying squirrel project in the Western Ghats, I immediately leaped on it and decided to quit my job, and that started off my journey in this field. As for challenges, initially it was difficult to get a leg into the field because I had no experience whatsoever, and often the job requirement was that you needed some field work, which I didn't have. So I eventually managed to put some of my engineering skills to use in the next project, which I did in the Indian Institute of Science at Karthik Shankar's lab. And that helped me then go on different fieldwork trips and slowly build experience from there. As an engineer, I think some of the challenges I felt was to develop skills in critical thinking and reasoning, which is really important as a scientist and researcher. You have to constantly critique what papers you are reading or what findings people are telling you resulted from their study, and you can't really accept things at face value, which coming from an engineering field is kind of hard, because sometimes you just solve a math problem and the solution is like it's true, but that's not always the case for science, because there are a lot of assumptions that are made, and you can't accept findings at face value. Another thing that I think I still struggle a little bit is just how slow science can be. So you can't really wrap up a project at the end of a deadline. For example, an engineering project might just finish when you are able to hand it over to a client, and you have a model that you work on works well, and you hand it over. But science is very, very slow. It's incremental. You learn things over time. Often there are government policies that set you back. So all of that has been a learning, and sometimes I still wish that the field was so messy, but that's just how it is.
Yeah, that was interesting to hear, and definitely, yeah, science is a different ball game altogether than engineering, which is more, very much more result driven. Science is more, I think, question driven and process driven. So there is a big difference in how things work. But it was
Yeah.
good to hear that you also managed to actually utilize your software and IT experience for working in ecology, or actually finding work at first in ecology, especially with respect to modeling softwares and those kind of things. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I think there might be many more opportunities now for people with zero experience. And also, I owe it to people like Karthik Shankar who are willing to take a chance on people very new to the field.
Yes, yes, his work is very diverse and interesting in molecular phylogeny and evolution, especially.
Yeah, yeah.
So you did mention the master's program which you got admitted to, and you did your masters from NC based wildlife biology. So your project during your masters was on the impact of the invasive Prosopis plantations on the behavior of nocturnal rodents in Bandi grasslands. So this is a very vast grassland ecosystem. So what was your experience working in this project uh, in a especially challenging landscape?
So I wouldn't call the landscape challenging. It was remote, and it was my first time doing field work. It was about 60 kilometers from the nearest city, which was Bhuj in Gujarat. But we had a lovely field station that was run by Sahajivan and Atri at the time. And there were several people from the local communities working at the field station, helping us with our field work, helping us with food, often calling us to their homes to celebrate festivals or just for a meal. And there were also other researchers in the field station working on different aspects of the grasslands, and also the very diverse pastoralist communities that work there. So at no point did I feel alone, which sometimes you tend to feel while doing fieldwork, because you're in a completely different landscape and cut off from places that you are familiar with, and often it's for very, very long periods of time. And so you tend to feel very lonely, and I didn't feel that at all at the field station. I found it such a rich experience, both interacting with all of the local communities and understanding the landscape from them, as well as interacting with the researchers and understanding all of their different insights from their work. And also just, during downtime, we had people to talk to and laugh with and just watch something on our laptops with. And all of that made a big difference. I think field stations are places of so much possibilities, because they give you so much perspective when you talk to the local communities who work there. And it's also a place where you can potentially collaborate and work on projects with your colleagues who work there?
Yeah, that is something I have also experienced. Like, even if the landscape itself might be, challenging to work, even if you might be working a lot in the landscape, but yeah, a vibrant field station definitely uh, makes things easier when working on the field. And it is always interesting to interact with the locals there also in the field sites. So definitely, I think that's a nice aspect of field work.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And not something that's very common, because we in India, I don't think we have a whole lot of field stations set up in different places. So often it's just the researcher, living in temporary accommodation and not meeting people for long periods of time, which is not great for your mental health either.
Yeah, that's true. It can be isolating. So, after masters, you then worked as a research consultant at CWS, where you modeled landscape accessibility for large mammals in the Western Ghats and Central India. So, how did your results inform conservation plans for these biodiverse regions?
Yeah, so this project was also with the Foundation of Ecological Research, Advocacy and Learning, which is FERL, based in Bangalore and Pondicherry. Um, and what we wanted to do was to understand how permeable the Western Ghats and Central India are to mammal movement, because both these landscapes support large mammals such as gaur, leopards, and sambar, which move and they range over really large areas. And both these landscapes are also very fragmented by linear infrastructure such as roads and railway lines, and also fragmented by land use types such as agriculture and plantations. So we wanted to understand how these large mammals move in these landscapes, because if they're very fragmented, then that means that there's not a lot of connectivity for movement, and forest fragments can become more and more isolated, which also isolates animal population and reduces gene flow. So for this project, we modeled how these animals would move in the landscape, which means, for example, if a leopard were moving in a forest, came to the boundary of the forest, and it reached an agricultural field, would it move into the agricultural field or would it move away? That's something we modeled, and the decisions that the animals took were based on information that we collected from scientists who studied these different mammals. So we were working in an environment that, I mean, we didn't have a lot of information on where these animals move, right? A lot of them are not radio collared, and that information is absent. So we had to rely on people who have studied them for many years and who have observed them moving in different landscapes to build this model that predicts where these animals will move when they encounter different features in the landscape. And what we came up with at the end of the project are maps for these different mammals that highlight areas where movement is not restricted by, for example, infrastructure like roads or railways, areas where movement is impeded um, by a barrier, and where uh, movement is sort of channeled through a bottleneck because there's a very small area available for movement. So we hope that this map will help to identify these areas where connectivity needs to be improved by building structures such as overpasses and underpasses for animal movement. And this has actually been done in central India. Um, and also identify areas where putting more infrastructure, such as siting another railway line or another road, might further reduce connectivity and further reduce movement. Uh, yeah.
And that is very cool work actually. And yes, habitat connectivity corridors and similar issues which are currently very important in conservation need to be studied more. and of course linear infrastructure and roads, habitat fragmentation, all these do affect the movements of highly endangered mammals which we have. So certainly studies like this will definitely help prioritize which areas need more conservation and also more connectivity. I think yes, in central India they have made some overpasses and
Yes.
structures which will definitely help the animals. So more of that is needed definitely. So Anisha, you also worked on another major wildlife issue, that is human-wildlife interactions, specifically studying how urbanization affects the movement and crop foraging behavior of Asian elephants. In this also you built elephant behavior models to understand the decision making. So what kind of on-ground solutions can be built using your modeling work, and especially with respect to the crop raiding?
Yeah. So this was not on human wildlife conflict per se, but really modeling the movement of the elephants to identify likely areas of its movement. And it's very similar to what I just spoke about, where we worked on large mammal movement in central India and Western Ghats. So this project was also with Feral, and it was with my colleague Nishant Srinivasaya, who has been studying elephants for more than a decade now, and has some great data on individual elephants and where they move. And for elephants, it's really important to have information on where individuals move, because each individual takes different decisions on where to move in the landscape, taking both risk into account, taking foraging opportunities into account. And this varies based on both the sex and the age of the elephant. And so this was a very rich data set to work with and build that animal movement model, because I think our predictions were a little more fine scaled compared to the previous one, where we had to just rely on experts to help us with the decision model. But here we had um, information on where these individuals were moving across the landscape from camera trap data um, from Karnataka. So similar to the previous project, we could generate maps that show where the elephants are likely to move. And given that it's a model, we can also play around with different scenarios. So a few of the scenarios we looked at was where elephants move in response to interventions that are put in by the forest department, such as a barrier along the protected area. And their reasoning is that the barrier will prevent elephants from exiting the forest. But the movement models also show that these barriers prevent elephants that are outside from entering the protected area. Another scenario we looked at was what movement will look like in a future scenario, where we incorporated a future landscape of what Bangalore and the surrounding area will look like, with more agriculture and more urbanization and more barriers to movement. And so these predictive models help understand where the elephants are likely to move given these different scenarios, and where maybe you need to put in more connectivity measures. And also with elephants, another finding that another finding from this work was that large water bodies in agricultural landscapes helps elephants. It's sort of a refuge for elephants during the daytime. So it's sort of an unintentional consequence of these water bodies in agricultural areas, which are used for irrigation. But the elephants use them just to rest during the daytime and then feed on crops during the nighttime. And so some of the simulation models help show how these water bodies may influence movement as well. And I just want to mention that it wasn't just me who worked on the model, but also my colleague, Rajat Nayak.
I see. That is, yeah, very interesting. Again, a very interesting study, and model, because elephants, as many of our listeners we also know, are extremely intelligent animals, one of the most intelligent, definitely, in the mammal world. And they quickly learn about changes in the surroundings, and try to adapt accordingly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I haven't been on the field as much as I would have liked, but I always enjoy hearing from my colleague Nishant, um, who has followed these elephants for so many years now. And for example, he's spoken about how farmers have put in these hanging wire electric fences to prevent elephants from entering their crop fields, and they have to quickly remove these fences so that the elephants don't learn how to navigate them, because their learning happens quite quickly, as you said.
Yes, that is the interesting part about elephants. That's why I think I read, I think somewhere in Northeast or either Western Ghats, one of these areas, they have tried lemon fences and some more natural barriers, which seem to repel the elephants but not harm them like we electrical fences do. I would say these less harmful measures might seem to be the way forward, instead of electrical
Yeah,
fences.
and I think just as they adapt to the different ways that we are trying to prevent them from entering crop fields, we similarly have to adapt and try out new ways.
Yes, definitely, it's like a co-evolution going on.
Yeah, yeah.
Moving on to the next question, uh, and now we come to your current PhD work, which is mapping the plantations and also calculating the carbon storage potential, which is officially known as carbon sequestration of trees in plantations. So you currently also did some of this work in Pune and in the grasslands surrounding Pune, like Saswad. Can you elaborate on this plantations issue, and what kind of aims are you hoping to achieve from this work?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm mapping the extent of tree plantations in Maharashtra, um, and I'm focusing on Maharashtra because it's one of the states which have the largest extents of open natural ecosystems, which are ecosystems like grasslands and savannas that don't have a lot of tree cover. And these ecosystems are disproportionately targeted for tree planting because they have low tree cover. But they are ecosystems where biodiversity and local communities, um, where biodiversity is adapted to low tree cover, and where local communities depend on these ecosystems for their livelihoods. And so, planting trees has impacts on biodiversity, on local communities, as well as uncertain impacts on carbon storage. Because a common assumption is that if you plant trees, then the carbon storage in the ecosystem increases. But that's not true everywhere. It depends where you plant trees. And studies, for example, from Africa, where, for example, tree cover has increased naturally because of warming climate and other reasons in savannas. Studies have found that despite increasing tree cover, carbon in the ecosystem has not increased as much. Um, so I'm trying to test whether planting trees in these open ecosystems in India um, raises carbon in a cost effective manner. So, given the amount of investment going into the tree plantations, does the amount of carbon stored in them increase in a way similarly to a forest where restoration may provide more carbon benefits? Um, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, this covered your research, but another question which we wanted to ask was like, uh, what are your opinions regarding the current trend of plantations we are seeing, especially in India? and especially in urban areas, and how it might affect these open natural ecosystems, especially because, especially in Pune, and I have seen this, uh, the plantations on Tekadis have started very recently and in a very large scale. So, wanted to know your opinion about this plantation trend.
Yeah, so I think tree plantations have always been very popular as like an environmental solution to different problems, starting from desertification to degradation and now climate change. So it's always seen as this silver bullet solution, like you plant a tree and then you'll have more water, maybe you might have more rainfall, your ecosystem may be restored. But it's not as simple as that. And it really depends what trees you are planting, at what densities, and where. And in open natural ecosystems where tree cover is naturally low, it can be quite problematic to plant more trees because, in addition to planting trees, you're also trying to maintain the tree plantation, for which you have to curtail grazing, for which you have to suppress fire. And those two forms of disturbances are actually key to maintaining the savanna, because what the fire does, especially when it's at a low scale, is to keep the tree cover low and to help the grasses regenerate in areas where the tree cover opens up. And similarly, grazing is important to keep the grass cover low. And so both these forms of disturbance are key to a savanna, but by keeping them out and by planting trees, you're just fundamentally altering the landscape. And fire suppression in particular can be very harmful because in surrounding areas outside the tree plantation, if there is a lot of grass, that can build up over time and lead to very harmful wildfires. So you're increasing the intensity of the wildfire by suppressing fires. So definitely tree plantations are very harmful in ONEs, which are open natural ecosystems. I think the awareness is slowly, very slowly building about the importance of these ecosystems, about the fact that India even has these ecosystems, and about the fact that trees cannot be planted everywhere. And this realization is coming among some private organizations planting trees and doing different kinds of restoration work, and also within the forest department. But I think it's the realization is not growing fast enough, and the popularity of tree planting and the amount of funding going into tree planting far outpaces this understanding that we have that trees may not be right everywhere.
Yeah, definitely, and I definitely understand even like citizens their interest in doing something for the environment, but it should be very well thought out. Just planting trees anywhere definitely doesn't help the ecosystem, especially if it's grassland. And you have told the negative impacts very well. And there has also been research which has shown that the diversity of grassland birds and small shrubs takes a big hit due to these plantations, and especially if it is plantation of invasive species like Gliricidia and some other culprits. So definitely a very important topic which you are studying and a very relevant topic today.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think the State of India's birds report also found that open natural ecosystems was one of the ecosystems that saw the sharpest declines in bird species. So for a lot of biodiversity that's adapted to open habitats with low cover, increasing tree cover can be really, really detrimental. And I often see in project reports of organizations that plant trees that they see biodiversity in these new tree plantations, but they're all just generalist species, not you're likely seeing a decline in species adapted to open habitats and an increase in generalist species, which is not really what we want.
Yes, that is definitely true. uh, generate species like bulbuls and all these generalists will definitely increase with all these plantations, but grassland species like shrikes or even raptors, which are seen in such a great number in the grasslands of Pune, they might take a hit if these plantations increase or continue increasing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So now, shifting away from your research work, we will now talk about a very interesting book project which you did, known as the Living Museum, and it was in a collaboration with various other writers, chronicling the urban diversity in a very beautiful way with narrative paragraphs about various birds and insects and other animals. So, how did this project come about, and how has the reception been to this book?
Yeah, thanks for those words about the book. So, I'm part of a group called Cafe Oikos, which has three other people: Ishika Ramakrishnan, who's also a researcher, and Shishir Rao, who is also currently doing his PhD on rivers, and Manani Bansal and Janavi Rajan, who are both illustrators and designers. So it's a lovely mixed team of people. And we initially started Cafe Oikos as a way to get scientists into public spaces to talk about their work to the larger public. That's on a hiatus right now. And during one of our talks, it was a talk by Vena Kapoor on spiders, and it was a talk where a lot of kids attended. A lot of kids were in the audience, and we loved seeing how responsive they were to spiders. We had a little walk afterwards, and we loved seeing the excitement on their faces. And that's, I think, one reason that prompted us to start a project on urban biodiversity. And this is a project between Ishika, Manani, Janavi, and I. Um, so we applied for a grant from the Bangalore Sustainability Forum and the Nagaratna Memorial Grant. Initially, we wanted to make a film on urban biodiversity, but that then became a book because of the pandemic. And I'm really happy actually that it is a book because I think books have a much larger shelf life compared to a movie, and it's something that you can keep returning to, and each time you read it, you may take away something a little different. So it's basically a book on urban biodiversity that's illustrated by Sunena Coelho that really, really brought all of the different insects and birds and trees to life. Um, and we imagined nature in the city as though it were a living museum because everything in the city is a bit orchestrated. So you have parks and then you have, ornamental trees, but still there's so much life around you. So it's kind of like a museum because it's orchestrated and planned, but it's also alive. It's changing with seasons. There's a lot happening even from hour to hour in a day. And we imagined a guide for the living museum, which is a jumping spider, because we wanted something that can potentially jump around different halls of the museum. So we had like 4 different halls. One of them was inside your house, one is in the garden, one is by the roadside, and one is the night at the living museum where you get a different host of characters. So it was, yeah, such a great project to work on with the rest of the team. Oh, and the reception, you had also asked about the reception. It was really wonderful. So I think we initially printed 1,000 copies, and it sold out really quickly in about 4 or 5 months. And we're still getting a lot of requests for more prints of the book, even though it's currently freely available online. But we will be doing another print run early next year, along with a Kannada translation of the book. And it's also just great to see other groups that do nature walks and nature education, like Spiders and the Sea, use it in their own nature walks or in their own, like in their classrooms. And it's also wonderful to hear from people who initially was scared of spiders, but thanks to seeing the jumping spider that was brought to life by Sunena Coelho, they now look at it with a slightly different light.
That's wonderful to hear, and definitely bringing forth biodiversity in a very friendly and vibrant way, especially for kids, is very important nowadays because everybody is so busy with their life, with their work, with their school that sometimes we forget what beautiful biodiversity exists, even 10 feet away from our house in a garden in the urban habitats. So definitely that was a wonderful project, and yeah, I'm also hoping to read it sometime. I also have worked with kids content related to nature, and definitely the way it has been written resonated very much with my own articles even I have written and even I have read in kids literature. So it was nice to see that.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I think it was during the pandemic when everyone was at home, at least everyone slightly privileged who were able to spend time looking at their gardens. But it did feel like there was a shift after the pandemic where there seems to be more interest in nature and in nature walks and in urban biodiversity. People would not really think about noticing stuff in cities much before, and would instead want to go to a faraway protected area maybe to look at wildlife. But there's so much life and so much happening in cities.
Yeah, definitely. I think lockdown made us miss the nature even around us. Definitely. So it was a very nice discussion with you, Anisha. And now we are coming to the final two questions, which we always ask our speakers. Having worked in ecology and conservation as a woman, did you face any challenges working in this field?
Yeah, so I feel like that's a difficult question to do justice to in just a few minutes. So I'll just talk about what's been at the top of my mind since I just did field work a couple of months ago in Pune, and um, I set out to the field just when that Kolkata rape case was announced, and I was feeling not very great about starting field work. Um, and, I mean, having to worry about bodily safety is just like another added layer of worry that feels very unnecessary. And I feel like I really hate that we have to have that worry even. And it also came back later towards the end of fieldwork when I met you, and then you told me about another rape that happened in Bhopdev Ghat in Pune, and I had to then drop that site. So it was just very frustrating and upsetting that, women have to have this added layer of thing to think about that settles on your mind, in addition to the hundreds of other things that you have to plan and think about when you're leading a fieldwork project. Yeah, um, I wish we didn't have to do that. And also, on a much smaller scale, um, while doing fieldwork, you have to often navigate these very gendered spaces that exist in villages. So, for example, um, you may not readily be able to walk into a bar and strike up a conversation with someone at a table the same way a man would be able to, and learn more about the area that you are visiting. Similarly, a man may not be able to enter a kitchen and talk to a woman about her work and her life. Um, and those are just the realities of rural areas in India that we need to navigate. Um, but yeah, it's something that always comes up in my mind when I do field work. There are many, many other things which I think needs a much larger conversation, longer conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I'm very sorry to hear you had to skip that site, but definitely like the whole security aspect of these several sites and general security issues which so many women face in India even today is a big issue, and it's something which we openly talk about on this podcast, and we hope there is some awareness, more awareness about this issue, and uh, society as a whole takes action uh, to hopefully reduce this issue in the future. But yes, it will take a lot of time, but it's important to have these conversations, otherwise people won't realize the problems which women face.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for having space on your podcast for this. And I also just wanted to raise that it's not just women as a sole identity, but all of these intersecting identities of women and different castes and different kinds of sexualities, but all of that adds up and you face very different issues. And yeah, definitely having spaces where you can talk about it is very important, even if we don't immediately come up with solutions, but um, we do need to talk about it more.
Yes, definitely. It's a very layered issue, that's for sure. So, coming to the end of our podcast, and the last question, which we always ask our speakers, is what is your message to our nature inclined audience, especially considering your background? If maybe we might have some listeners who are like you, who are working in IT or engineering or different fields, but they want to work in wildlife. They have that interest, but don't know where to look. Or anybody interested in this field, what would your message be?
Um, I think there's a lot of opportunities in the field currently, given the urgency of climate change and all the other intersecting crises that we face. So, a lot more work opportunities for people from very different backgrounds, and we really do need people from very different backgrounds to, bring insights and different skills. You don't necessarily have to do a master's and a PhD to contribute. You can be a writer, you can be a coder, you can be a lawyer. So we really need very different kinds of skill sets. The only thing is, it doesn't pay very well. And I mean, there's often the assumption that you just have to be passionate and you can't really worry about money, but that's not really fair, and you can't really, I mean, that excludes a whole class of people who may not be able to afford working in a career like this. So that's the unfortunate truth. And I think as a community, we really need to make sure that all of the salaried positions are, don't pay peanuts, and people are able to afford working in cities where there is high inflation. And so it's really incumbent on us as a community to make sure that this expectation of people having to just let passion carry them forward, that can't continue. Um, but that said, I think there still are positions where which do pay well and where you may find that you're able to make a big difference. It's a field that's slowly growing, and um, it's also a field where you sort of have to carve your own path because it's so small in India. So yeah. Oh, also, I guess since I mentioned about the different crises we're in, I guess just don't lose hope. It's easy to lose hope, but there's a lot of power in coming together with people to approach problems together rather than thinking that one person can solve anything.
Yes, that was a very nice message, Anisha, and definitely, yes, this field is very small, and the issue about better salary definitely needs to be raised, because it's not all just hunky dory. Doing any ecology, especially field work, it is fun, but it is also very taxing mentally and physically. And any researcher should get adequate compensation for their efforts. And we definitely do need diverse skill sets in this field, especially not just field research, but also more people from mathematical background, more people from social, especially I think more people from sociology background are needed, and that aspect of conservation definitely needs more work uh, in India.
Definitely, yeah,
So
for sure.
yes, so yeah, that was a very important message, and thank you, Anisha, for appearing on our podcast.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Arjit, for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Anisha. It was a very insightful discussion about ecology and wildlife, and I am sure the listeners will like it. Thank you.
Thank you.